Hey class, just wanted to run through some notes with you guys from Chapter 7 tonight. And I'll send this study guide out to you afterwards, but I wanted to go over a few things. I want to let you know that when you answer the question of who's in prison these days, obviously gender-wise there's more men than women that are in prison, just by the nature of how the socioeconomic system works, and men just commit more crimes than women do. Race-wise, there's more minorities than there are whites. That's an unfortunate byproduct of our society, is that socioeconomically minorities are disadvantaged and therefore tend to have to commit crimes or do commit crimes as a result of their lack of jobs and financial opportunities. Age-wise, historically, the average first-time prisoner is about 25 to 30 years old. But change is blowing in the wind. Our prison population is getting older and younger at the same time. Questions are why? The number one reason that I can think of is that longer sentences are given to convicted offenders. Another reason is judges don't have much discretion as they used to have. Legislation has taken away much of their discretion. They have to follow the sentencing guidelines for the most part. Number three, this U.S. population is actually getting older. That makes a difference. People are living longer, and therefore, the longer they live, the more crimes they commit. Types of sentences play into this also, mandatory minimums. Youth are tried as adults more often than they used to be. And understand there are even some older people who commit crimes just to get into prison. You may ask yourself why, and the real reasons why older people might commit crimes to get into prison are that it's a steady amount of their food, their shelter, their clothing is all provided. They get 3 hots and a cot. Health care is provided for them. They get social interaction that they might not get if they're living on the streets or homeless. And as a regular part of society, prison does provide a city-like atmosphere, and a lot of people get used to that, and that's the reason they'll come back to prison or commit a crime to go to prison. It's just the stability of what prison life is like. There are 2 types of crimes that are found in prison. They're violent and nonviolent. I think the violence is pretty self-explanatory. The greatest percentage of prisoners that are found in prison are violent offenders. Second category, the nonviolent, they may include drug offenses or what they call property crimes, which might be like breaking and entering, stealing of different types. And of course, drug crimes speak for themselves. Although you need to note that here in Michigan, one of the big changes that's happened as far as drug laws go is the fact that we legalized marijuana recently, and that's impacted our prison population because arrests of that offense are down. So fewer people are going to prison for marijuana offenses. However, meth and heroin and fentanyl and other drugs are taking their place, so still there's a lot of drug offenses still going on in the world, and there's not much we can do about that except continue to make more laws and try to enforce them. I want you to review the differences between the males and the female offenders as listed in your textbook. Read pages 215 to 230 if you haven't already. Also, when you note these topics when it comes to difference between males and females. Male prisoners tend to be more violent than female prisoners, and female prisoners are increasing in percentage of our prison population due to an increase in their equal rights and sentencing guidelines, mandatory minimums, a lack of judges' discretion. It also means that more women are going to prison under those same guidelines. With equal rights come equal sentences. Female offender programming, I want you to know the cases that are relevant to this chapter. That Glover versus Johnson is not, it was in your PowerPoint, but it was not in your textbook. That's a Michigan case. It's a landmark case. A person named Mary Glover, who was in the Michigan Department of Corrections, filed a lawsuit against Perry Johnson, who was the director of the Michigan Department of Corrections, in order to get equal programming for female offenders. That case lasted almost 20 years, and I had to actually testify in federal court on that case in Ann Arbor because I was in charge of a women's work program. Fortunately, I got off pretty easy that day. I only had to spend a couple hours on the stand, and it was all good. The suit went on for almost 20 years. It was finally settled. The women did win equal programming rights in most cases, And they based their arguments mostly on the 8th and 14th Amendments. So they wanted equal protection under the 14th Amendment, and they wanted humane treatment under the 8th Amendment. The second case, the Barfield versus Leach, that's in your textbook, and it follows the same principles that are concerned in the Glover versus Johnson case. And the third landmark case is Pargo versus Elliott. That landmark case did say one thing that was a little different. It said that there can be program differences that can exist between male and female offenders. They don't have to be exactly equal. So that being said, it did define the fact that there could be some differences. Wanted to note in here, special female offender programming includes but is not limited to things like parenting programs, substance abuse programs that are specialized towards female offenders, job skills training. A lot of them come in with no skills or very little skills, so they need to get some extra job skills. Their education may be less in some areas. That's both male and female, but oftentimes females get pulled out of school even faster than the males. They need psychological support and medical support. I want you to note one more difference between the males and the females, and that is a thing called morbidity versus mortality. Female offenders are going to ask for medical assistance when they don't feel good, and they'll report more health issues than what the male offenders will report. That's just a tradition that's happened. We call that morbidity. They'll say that they don't feel good, whereas the male offenders are less likely to report that they don't feel good, so what they end up doing is just dying. They just hold back and don't tell anybody, all of a sudden they just keel over dead, and that's called mortality. So morbidity is probably better than mortality. If you want to live longer, it's okay to say you don't feel good. Some of the other special issues to note regarding needs of female offenders that should always be noted by staff who work in a female facility are that many of those females are moms. They're going to miss their kids a lot. And some of them may be pregnant when they come into us. We have to deal with that. Or if they come into the county jail, they might be pregnant. So they're going to have some special housing, special medical needs. And they'll be often segregated off into the pregnancy unit where they get a little extra care because they're looking out for the baby as well as the mom. Oftentimes, female offenders have been sexually abused or exploited, and many suffer from that. And so there's a lot of psychological follow-up that we have to do in those areas to try to make them know that they're going to be okay. They're going to really put a lot of emphasis on visiting their kids and having visits from their family. It's extremely important to them. And the classification of female prisoners is different than it is for males. So the classification being different, what that means is basically although women in that Glover case wanted to have equal rights, they did not want to be classified the same as the men because especially when it comes to violent offenses, they did not want that same classification. So they petitioned the court to say, hey, although we want same programs, we don't want to be classified the same. We don't want everybody to think that we're violent. So because they didn't want everybody to think they're violent factor, that they went through a big review and they actually won that part of the case. So female offenders in the state of Michigan are not classified the same as male offenders when it comes to assaultive and violent acts. That's really just about all I wanted to talk about with that chapter. We'll get into chapter 8 next week. We'll probably have a practice review quiz that I'll send out over chapter 7, and maybe some odd questions that might come out of your syllabus too. Make sure that you do the assignments that are sent to you. They're not graded unless it's a quiz or a test or your research paper. There's only 5 things that are going to be graded this semester. So the rest of the stuff is what we call credit review, or it's going to be an attendance thing. So you need to do it to know that I'm still seeing that you're participating in class. The rest of the stuff I'll send out either as an announcement or as an email, or it'll be posted on Moodle. So in the meantime, I want you all to have a good night, and I'll talk to you soon. Hopefully we'll be face-to-face here in the next few weeks. That would be great. Bye-bye.